Hello, everyone, and welcome to this day. I'm Anna Bogotskaya. I'm a culture writer and a broadcaster, and I'm an extremely short-sighted white girl with very thick glasses. And I'm very, very, very pleased to be having this conversation today with the co-directors of CRIP CAMP, Nicole and Jim. Thank you so much, first of all, for your film. It's astonishing, and I've got tons of questions for you, but first, I'd like to begin before the film was made. I'd like to dig into your creative partnership really first, which I believe doesn't begin with this film. So when did you first start working together?
Um, Hi, well, I'm Jim, and I'm a white guy with black glasses and a very white goatee. I'm wearing a black shirt, and there's a red wall behind me with some posters on it. Um, I've had the really great fortune to have been working as a sound mixer and sound designer in documentary film in the Bay Area for, gosh, about 25 years uh, or so. And one of the people I started working with, I'm kind of early in my work in the documentary community, was Nicole. And over the course of many years, I've been her sound mixer and sound designer on three of her previous feature length documentaries. Um, so knowing her, and I've seen documentaries. I She and I wound up having a lunch one day as she was wrapping up her last film, and because I felt like there were films around disability that I was hoping that maybe she might be interested in making, and talked to her about a bunch of things, and but actually kind of sheepishly I kind of said, I've always wanted to see a film about my summer camp. I think there's a really good story there.
I think that when Jim said that to me, I was very excited about the idea of collaborating with him because we had a great time creatively working together on the sound design and mixing of my other documentaries. And also Jim had become kind of a like a portal for me into a world that I was increasingly becoming aware of, and also kind of understanding how much I didn't understand about it. He was talking to me a lot about his community, about disability as culture, about disability pride, about disability as a civil rights issue, frankly, was kind of a different frame for me. I think most of us think about disability from, what is a really harmful way of seeing it, which is this sort of charity model. And I think the story of how people with disabilities have fought for equality and fought for civil rights has been really suppressed in our kind of collective consciousness. And so when Jim mentioned this summer camp to me, okay, I kind of rolled my eyes because I think everybody feels like their summer camp was so special. And, I'm like, does your summer camp really deserve to be a feature-length documentary? I don't know. But as he started talking about it, it was such an exciting idea. And even in that very first description, he said to me, after painting this picture of this, hippie Valhalla where people with disabilities and people without disabilities came together in the full throes of the summer of love and all of that, kind of revolutionary culture. He said, I really think there was something about this camp and the experience people had there that connects to the disability rights movement that was sparked later on in the 1970s, because there was this exodus of people who came from the camp out to the Bay Area and were pivotal leaders in the movement. And that just seemed so exciting to me. But the kind of missing piece was really what was exciting was Jim having lived this story and being kind of poised to take on, a key creative role in the telling of it. And so I went back to Jim and said, do you think we could co-direct this together? And we started trying to figure out how would we help people immerse themselves in the camp experience, given at that time we didn't know there was all of this footage that we later found.
That's wonderful. And Jim, I wanted to ask you kind of how did you mentioned that kind of you sheepishly mentioned this idea of wanting to make this film about the summer camp to Nicole, but did you want to direct it? Did you want to co-direct it, make it together with her? Or was it something that you wanted to exist on a screen? What was kind of your ambition when you were beginning the journey of this project?
I literally just wanted to hand it to Nicole, and and I you know, and so I was actually surprised when she said, "Hey, let's direct this together." I mean, very quickly I went, "Wow, that would be awesome." Really, me? Okay, good, wonderful. And it's turned out to be like this incredible kind of collaboration. I mean, just I could actually talk about that for for years and years. Just in that, how do two filmmakers come together, and how do people work in film that come from two different communities and do it the right way? Not that I'm saying that we're like the gold standard or anything. It's just that we were very, very intentional about kind of how we were working together.
And could you elaborate a little bit more on that, on kind of on those intentions and what you've described as kind of working together in the right way?
Well, I think the key here was that asking me to be direct with Nicole was that it really had to come from within the community, and as I've actually kind of reflected back and look at the other films I worked with Nicole, that there is this really great sense of really being inside the community, and I've seen in some of her other films. And so that was, I think that was just really, really important to us, that you don't assume anything, that we work together, because I know a lived experience around disability, but also, and actually the beauty is that she didn't, right? So it was like, well, Jim, what does this mean? Or I might have come into the editing room a few hours after Nicole had been working with our editor, and what do you think about this? And then we could really, really kind of talk about it. And it wasn't like, oh, this is wrong, but it was a meaty discussion about, I'm not sure about this one thing here, because I think it maybe paints things not quite in the right light. And so it wasn't just fix this. It was a discussion about, what did this mean? And because this is my first time being a director on a film. And we're working with some incredible editors. Nicole's an incredible filmmaker. So I can't also go into it thinking, well, because I'm the disabled person in the room, I know everything. I don't know. No one person can talk for a complete community.
One of the things that was so great was that, because Jim is so embedded in the disability community in the Bay Area, and a lot of really kind of important key thinkers and activists in the disability community are in the Bay Area, and people that Jim is close to already. And so from the very beginning, we not only had the benefit of Jim's lived experience, but we had this way to engage lots of other people in the community and the conversation as the film was coming together. So from the very beginning, Jim was saying, like, we have to put in the budget that we're going to need to do a version that has audio description and titles, so that we can have a screening for the community, and people with various access needs will be able to actually watch the rough cut and give us feedback, which is something that as a non-disabled person I wouldn't have thought of putting in the budget, which sounds kind of like a practical detail, but it actually ended up paying off enormous dividends down the road, and became part of our process all the way along, in terms of, we approached every workshop we went to, and every grant we got, and every kind of interaction that we had with people who became stakeholders in the project, as sort of a like an impact opportunity. Like, it was an opportunity to talk with and educate and open up the eyes of people in the film industry. And it also, really kind of attached people to the project, and in a kind of profound way. So I feel like it almost, we've talked about the film itself as kind of like an icebreaker in the industry, kind of going places that films haven't really gone to before, in terms of access and disability awareness. But also it felt a little bit like a snowball I mean, it's not the only film around disability made by a disabled filmmaker. There's starting to be kind of a critical mass of this. And it's just been really exciting, kind of, as the project has gathered steam, to feel all the potential for not just this story, but so many other stories to start getting, elevated and told.
And I wanted to ask you, kind of dovetailing from that and zeroing in on the impact of this film, is what was kind of the sense of responsibility that you had from the very beginning of this project, not just to Jim, to your own story and to the friends that you made in Camp Jeanette, but also the disabled community and the audiences that you wanted to be able to reach with this film?
I mean, obviously, I felt a sense of responsibility that we, do whatever we can to really get the story right and do it in a wonderful way. And it was incredible tenacity with all of us. I'm trying to, really do that. I just, I felt like, boy, it's a big what can I say? It's a big responsibility, and you got to get it right. You got to look at what other films have been, and even learn from what the criticism might have been on some other films around disability or disability history. And hand in hand with all of that is also us really wanting to really let people know that this is one story. This is one story about a group of people in time. And that this is not, and we don't want people to think that we think that this is the definitive story of the disabled civil rights movement in the United States. It is just one story, and there are many more that, need to be seen and made.
And I wanted to ask you more kind of about your process, and especially the research element of it. Kind of, I've read that you consulted with academics, with historians, with other civil rights activists. Kind of, what did you learn in the process of learning more about the history, and the things that you knew you had to get right? And it's interesting that you mentioned kind of other criticism that other films about the disabled community might have received in the past. What were some of the key learnings that you drew from your research period for this film?
One of the kind of amazing things was that part of the process of making the film was this sort of like testing of Jim's theory, like that Camp Jeanette had played a role in the disability civil rights movement was a theory when we started working on the film. And I got really excited about it and started writing up fundraising proposals that said that. And Jim was like, whoa, that's just my theory, we better verify it. So we did reach out to some academics who were looking at that, at kind of the role of not just Camp Jeanette, but places like Camp Jeanette, where people had, like Judy Heumann would say, kind of came together to go apart, and the role of these kinds of, disability specific places where people came together in community and building the social fabric and kind of shared sense of oppression and of a movement that enabled things to happen the way they did. And so our first call was to Judy Heumann, and she was like, absolutely, that camp was where we would lay in the bunks at night and we would talk about, hey, there's this civil rights movement happening around us. Why don't we have a movement like that of our own? And so, we developed a sense that the theory was correct, but then it was actually this wonderful interplay between reading and talking to people and then actually unearthing all of this archival footage of the marches and the things that had happened later, which have been fairly overlooked. I mean, there's some wonderful, kind of major books about disability, civil rights history, but a lot of the footage that we were pulling from and including in the film had never really been seen in a major film before. We were finding things, on DVDs in people's basements and, on old videotape reels that maybe like had been part of a documentary that was being put together. And was just like an old edit tape in a file box that we found somewhere in an archive. I mean, really kind of random sourcings of things, and then seeing all those Camp Jened people in that footage, you know? And sometimes we would call up a character from the film and say, were you at this March on Washington? And they would say, no, I don't remember. I don't think I was there. And then we'd say, well, isn't this you in this shot? And, oh my God, there I was, you know? So it was really fun to not only sort of like elevate the story of the disability civil rights movement kind of writ large through this story, but to also really kind of do something, I think, unusual in terms of kind of like stepping back and getting this long view and being able to kind of illustrate this kind of connective tissue that I think often is how history is made, and how movements are built and how change happens, but we don't often get to actually see how all those things fit together across decades and sort of the arc of people's lives.
I think that what is the kind of the saying that, you know, the history you learn about is really just funneled through the people that are telling that history, and that there's been a great sense within the community that our history and the people that have been focused on have been straight white people, and I, you know, this was something that we really focused on. It was making sure that the stories of, you know, non-white folks, making sure that we were going to do all the digging. And, you know, we were fortunate that we had so many resources at our disposal to really dig in and find this archival. And I have to tell you, just, you know, something as simple, well, not even simple, but as emblematic as the Black Panthers coming in to feed the people that were sitting in the federal building for 26 days. I happened not to be in the screening, but Nicole was at a screening at the True False Film Festival. And what was it you said, Nicole? The place erupted when that came on the screen?
Well, it was fantastic when the you know, it was one of our last theatrical screenings before the pandemic, and it was in a huge 1,200 person theater. And when the Panthers showed up with the food, everyone just, you know, jumped to their feet and started cheering like it was a superhero movie and Batman had arrived to save the day, you know. But I think we couldn't have predicted how that kind of intersectional piece of the story and the idea of kind of cross movement solidarity would just strike such a powerful chord in the moment that we find ourselves in right now. And that's only accelerated over last summer and this fall, you know. And it feels really good to have you know, to have shined a spotlight on that aspect of movement building that's so critical, I think, to you know, to making the change we need to make in our world today.
I mean, it's one of the most beautiful moments of the film, really. It's kind of seeing all these different communities come together, supporting each other, and kind of all guided by the very simple shared objective of trying to make the world a better place for everyone, not just for themselves. It's incredibly impactful. And I was wondering, I was actually meaning to ask you, of when you were making the film and when you were unearthing all this archival footage, was that a very important element of the film that you wanted to highlight, at this intersection of causes?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, starting with actually like Camp Jened, you know, I mean, one of the things that when we came into the film we were holding as being very beautiful and important was the fact that a number of the counselors at Camp Jened were from the civil rights movement, you know, and they really saw the kind of importance of the allyship. They were like literally sitting in Alabama watching the 504 sit-in happen on TV and cheering, you know, for these kids that they had, you know, counseled in their youth. And so, you know, the more we got into the story and the more we started reading about that, the sort of these intersections, the more excited we were. And there were things we didn't even put in the film that were incredible. Like we would look at footage of a gay rights march that same summer and see all these people from Camp Jened, like marching in the, you know, gay pride parade in San Francisco. And then, you know, a couple of months later, there's people from the Butterfly Brigade and the Castro coming in, sneaking walkie-talkies into the building so that the protesters could stay. And, you know, just to us, it did feel like a really important lesson that, and kind of, you know, a really precious part of this story for us to focus on.
And I wanted to ask you about the incredible footage from Camp Jened that makes up a big chunk of the film at the beginning. And could you talk a little bit about a process of securing that footage, and how did you react to it when you first saw it? Because I imagine one of the really fascinating things of you working together is, Jim, you're seeing yourself and your friends on in this footage, and Nicole, you had an experience, so you're kind of seeing it with completely fresh eyes. So what was that like for you?
Oh, there's no way you could even describe it, to be really honest with you. I mean, this day in which we received this hard drive full of these videos, Nicole and I were in our room working together, and it was just opening this time capsule. But the origin of this footage is kind of extraordinary, in that in the summer of '71, these people, this group called the People's Video Theater, were living close by for the summer to where Camp Jened was in the Catskill Mountains, and they happened to just at a gas station see some people from Camp Jened. And who are you people with these crutches and wheelchairs, and who are you video people, and come over to our camp and film our our Camp Olympics. And indeed, they did. And when they showed up, it wasn't the Camp Olympics that was going on, but in fact, two counselors had gotten the crabs, the body lice, and the whole camp was completely thrown into disarray. But I had this vague memory, because we're talking 45 years before, right, that these people had come to camp. And then, in fact, they had actually given me the camera one day. They had strapped this big, heavy deck to the handlebars of my wheelchair and gave me a camera, and somebody pushed me around camp as I did a tour of the camp. And I mentioned this to Nicole, and I said, I think the name People is the name of this group. That's kind of all I know. And, well, I mean, Nicole really tells the rest of the story really well.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the holy grail, right, for a documentary filmmaker, to think that here we were planning to recreate scenes of the camp with young actors with disabilities, and that had been our plan. But then to find out that not only was there footage that had been shot, but that Jim shot some of it himself, was extremely exciting. And so I was working on another project, but at night I would just look and look and look and look online. And finally somebody put a bunch of digitized copies of some old Radical Video Maker magazines online, and I started just paging through them at night. And on the last, page of one of them, I saw this little ad that said "Crabs Outbreak at Camp Jened for the Handicapped," by the People's Video Theater, $6.95, and that was the key to be able to track down who were those people and where did they still live. And we found Howard Gutstadt, one of the surviving members, was living just a few miles away from where we are. And we contacted him through the anarchist bookstore that he was on the board of. And he said, yeah, I'm halfway through digitizing all the footage. It survived 17 different moves and 17 different basements. And we need a little bit of money to complete the transfer. So we worked out a deal with them where we helped them complete the transfer, and they agreed to work with us on the documentary. And Jim and I went over to meet Howard at a cafe in San Francisco, and the minute that Jim wheeled in, Howard burst into tears, because these guys had really been there with the idea of empowering communities, and they had really deeply loved the experience of being at the camp. And they remembered Jim as a 15-year-old kid, even though they hadn't seen the footage, since the 70s when they shot it. So it was a very moving and wonderful collaboration with them kind of all the way along, I think, to try to, Jim and I felt a responsibility to carry forward the storytelling with the same kind of values and same spirit that they had. And, there's that scene where Nancy Rosenblum, one of the campers, is speaking, and all the kids are sitting around the table. And it never fails to just amaze both Jim and I, the incredible patience of the camera and the microphone, and the fact that Nancy is, it feels as though the People's Video Theater filmmakers are really a part of this very respectful, egalitarian community of people who really are willing to take the time to listen and make sure that everybody feels a part of it. And so we tried to actually make the film in that spirit too. We wanted to have that same kind of feeling of camaraderie and patience and being willing to accommodate people within our own filmmaking team. And it was really beautiful to see, I think, how that actually, kept making the film better and better and better.
One of the things that was really stunning to me was, you see them in the footage saying, "Hi, we're the People's Video Theater, and help us make a film about your camp." If they weren't who they were, they could have come in and just talked to the camp director and said, "How are you taking care of these poor handicapped children?" And for them to really approach us as peers and give us this agency was very unusual, especially given the time. And in fact, this footage that you see in our film about this kind of roundtable discussion came out of them saying, "What do you want to do?" "Well, we want to tell our parents what it's like. You're being overprotective. You're not. You're limiting what my hopes and dreams might be."
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was one of those things that I constantly think back on and thinking how incredible those folks are.
And that's just such an incredible treasure trove of footage to find as filmmakers and documentarians. What was your process for deciding what to leave in, and what was very important to maintain in the film to make sure that you told the story that you wanted to tell with CRIP CAMP?
It's really interesting. A lot of what turned out to be really important was not maybe as obvious as you would think. An example is that scene where Judy Heumann is wrangling all the campers about the cook's day off and the lasagna meal, which, everyone loves. And it was always a good scene, but originally it was cut a bit more traditionally, and the way it's in the film now, it's basically one long shot that goes on and on and on, and the camera's bobbling all over the place and whatnot. What we discovered was that it was really that kind of connective tissue that really made you feel like you were there. And that was so important. That was kind of like almost the most, I think there were two things that turned out to be the most important. One was that, like, really figuring out the language and how to cut that camp footage together, so that it felt like it was this immersive journey towards community, but you really had the experience that you had landed in that world and you were figuring out for yourself how to get your bearings in it, that was really important. And then the other thing was making sure that the emotional complexity of every scene was there, because what we were really always struggling against was the preponderance of negative and harmful tropes around disability in the media. And the fact that people's brains are almost pre-programmed to go to either a kind of like, "Oh my God, these disabled people are so inspirational" place, or "Oh God, that's so tragic" kind of place. And so we were constantly just kind of like fine tuning the film to try to make sure we were avoiding people's brains falling into one of those tracks or the other. And one of the ways to do that was to have these complex emotions where you were like, laughing through your tears, basically. And so we were lucky to have really talented editors working with us to make that happen. Sorry for the teenager.
Jim, did you want to comment on the things that maybe you thought were the most, did you want to add anything on what was the most important thing for you to keep from that footage that you found?
I mean, I think Nicole said it rather well. I think that, what I've really appreciated about it is that you really did feel like you were landing in camp. I think someone told us early on they felt like they were being parachuted into Camp Jeanette. And my gosh, when really early on, there's a scene where we go inside the bunk, and it's almost like you can almost like smell the the wood, the raw wood of the bunk, and you could almost really hear beyond kind of what the microphone was picking up. It just, to me, this kind of rolling up the ramp and seeing Steve Hoffman, and then going inside and seeing Tommy Curran and this counselor laid out in bed. I mean, that was what it was like.
Mm. And it feels literally like being in summer camp again for anyone who's been. But you spoke very eloquently about some of the stereotypes of representing and of seeing disabled people on screen, and how kind of those narratives have been presented before that you wanted to avoid. What do you think are some of those barriers in terms of both on-screen representation and behind-the-screen representation that you wanted to make sure to overcome or to not fall into?
Well, I mean, one of the bigger issues I think that my community experiences is kind of what's known as inspiration porn, and kind of what Nicole has been alluding to, in that you got a film or a news segment about somebody with a disability, and isn't it great? But that accomplishment, the bar is not very high, but people think that we're not capable of very much, so they find that very, very inspirational. Well, by putting that story out, it reinforces the idea that we're not capable of very much. And so I don't think there was too much of a danger of that happening in our film. We knew these things, and our biggest goal, I think, was to reframe how people thought about disability, and not just for the non-disabled, but for also people with disabilities. And that, if you got people to identify, more people to identify, to say, we are a powerful political force. We are 25% of the world's population. But, if there's stigma or shame around being disabled, then you're not going to identify, you're not going to organize, you're not going to try to push the agenda forward. And I think the feedback that we're getting from people is that, oh my gosh, you've shown me and have instilled upon me this great sense of pride in who I am. And our community is not just wheelchair users or people with white sticks. There's a wonderfully broad community here of people who have hidden disabilities, people who are autistic, people who, and I've really felt for people who have hidden disabilities, because I really didn't understand the impact that was, but I've learned so much on this film. And imagine having to kind of hide the fact that you might, you're diabetic, right? And maybe you just need to make sure that you're eating regularly, or you have a place you can privately go test, but you have to hide that, and can't ask for very simple accommodations because you're worried that people are going to think that you're incompetent, or that you're not going to be as resilient as anybody else if you reveal this. That's a horrible way to live. And in reality, we're working with people all the time. You just don't know we're there.
There's a really impactful moment. It's exactly as you described, that strikes me from the film. It's kind of this burden of pretending, that it's a burden, exactly how the film says. But I'm curious to hear more about some of the reactions from people, both from the disabled community and from outside the community, that you've noticed, or that have really surprised you, from the film being shown all around the world.
I mean, there's one thing that that really kind of stuck in my head very early on. I was seeing a comment on Facebook, and somebody said to me, for the first time in my life, I feel knowable. That's a pretty incredible place to have come from, and it's, it makes you feel like, oh my God. Well,
we've also heard these amazing comments from people who've said that they feel like there's this huge burden that's been lifted off of them, people with disabilities. One guy said, after we had a screening at the Museum of Modern Art, he said, thank God this film exists, because now when I want to try to share with people what it's like to be disabled, or like I want to tell them about my community or its history, I can just say like, go effing watch CRIP Camp. So, but I do think there's a bit of a relief, a sense of relief that finally there's something that people can point to, that feels authentic and feels true and gets across like a lot of kind of key points about how people with disabilities wish non-disabled people saw disability culture, disability history. But from the non-disabled audience, we've had very profound reactions as well. Everything from politicians realizing they want to go home and fight for accessible transportation and more kind of like policy related things, to very deeply personal, like people people basically grabbing our hands at Sundance and saying things like, I feel you've broken down the barriers. I feel somehow you've broken down the barriers. And that it was very meaningful to both of us, because one of the first things Jim said when we embarked on this project was, if people don't feel like they can just sit down and have a beer with us, or that they want to, then we're never going to really get a seat at the table. And so actually a lot of our effort in the film was also just kind of like making it clear that disability community and culture is actually like incredibly liberating and fun, and the sense of humor is wicked, and the take on life is amazing, and it's a party that you don't want to miss out on, basically. Yeah. So it's great to feel that people feel that way now, like they see someone in a wheelchair, they can just go up and talk to them, and that sounds like kind of a sort of silly basic thing for a film to achieve as impact, but for us it also feels really profound.
No, it certainly feels like an incredible impact. And there's something that you've both mentioned kind of about unearthing or showcasing the history of this community. And I wanted to ask you, because it's something that you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation. The sit-in was such a huge moment in the film, but it's also such a huge moment in disability rights history. And you mentioned the word suppressed at the beginning of it. And I wanted to ask you, kind of, it had a vast, huge impact. So why do you think it's not been better known so far?
I think people are very invested in this charity model of disability, and it's much more comfortable for people who don't want to have to make more concessions, to look at the ADA or the 504 as something that, we kind of deigned to give to people with disabilities. And I think if that history is seen as a really powerful civil rights movement, then it begs all kinds of other questions about things that still aren't fair and aren't right and still need to be done, So I think there has been a suppression of this story and of this history. It's been overlooked because people with disabilities and their issues have continued to be overlooked. And it was actually, it was shocking to be discovering that kind of in archive after archive, and also overwhelming when the film came out to hear this just chorus of people saying like, why did I never know this story? Why did I never know this story? And Judy Heumann, was sitting on the stage at Sundance, and people kept asking her that from the audience. And she said, maybe you never wanted to hear it. So I think the film is actually causing people to kind of, ask themselves those questions in a way that I hope will provoke people paying more attention to this history. And ultimately, our goal was that these stories be incorporated kind of in the canon of great civil rights stories, and kind of the way that we especially as Americans, kind of tell us the story of ourselves and who we are as people.
And how do you think, kind of for both of you, how has the release model of the film, and specifically kind of once it came onto Netflix and became available in so many different territories, how did that help aid and spread the word, not just about the film, but about this sit-in, this camp, this history?
Well, as we were, in the deep weeds of making our film, conversations with Netflix started happening. And then this incredible moment, which Higher Ground, the Obama's production company, we got connected with them and talked, and they wanted to come on board and be executive producers on our film. And I think that really kind of told us, okay, we're really, we're going to have a really big platform here, that Netflix has an incredible reach, and that the Obamas are so beloved throughout the world that we weren't going to get lost in the. We did hope we were, we weren't going to get lost in the shuffle, as long as we made a really good film.
But the global platform aspect of it has been really exciting, because different countries are at different places in terms of their trajectories around disability rights. But the story is now being offered up to everyone, and everyone can converse about it globally. So we had this incredible impact campaign led by two incredible women out of the disability justice movement, which really is a kind of an evolution of the disability rights movement that prioritizes the voices and leadership of BIPOC queer people in the disability community, people who've been marginalized within disability. And they, when the pandemic hit, they kind of shifted our whole impact campaign strategy and held a 16-week virtual camp, and made it available to everyone in the world, basically. And 10,000 people from all over the world came. And Dennis Billups, who sings in the 504 sit-in at CRIP Camp, sang in every session. And these incredible, leaders from the disability justice community did kind of discussions and teachings every week. And there was, kind of a group collaborative Google Doc and chats going on, and Facebook groups popping up. And you really did have this sense that that around the film, kind of a global community is being developed, that I think had a lot to do with the way that the film provided kind of the story really provided like an on-ramp for people, who may not have identified themselves as disabled, or didn't really know kind of where to start being a part of the community, to kind of, come into community and figure out how, play a role in kind of figuring out where does the movement go from here.
And the film is one aspect, and then there's the impact campaign that you've just been talking about. What are some of the practical steps that people can take to get engaged and galvanized and activated and be a part of the campaign once they've seen the film on Netflix? What else can they do, kind of on an individual level, but also as a film industry?
I think the first step would be to come to our film's website, which is cripcamp.com, and that signing up there, you can actually get access to the videos that from these incredible summer camp meetings that we've had. I would also say that talk, basically say, hey, there's this great film, plus there's educational materials on our website. And there's a lot of resources there, and simply say, it's not a really great film about people in wheelchairs. It's a great film. And I mean, I now I realize I feel like incredibly unhumble when I say that, and I apologize that. But what I'm trying to say is that I think the message here is that our film is so much more than just disability. There's universal messages there that I think that we all want people, to hear.
There's actually going to be a summer camp session, like a sort of, the group is going to reunite for a session this weekend, which you can find out about on our social media pages. And I also think that people in the film industry should consider looking at this incredible organization that Jim helped found a couple of years ago called Forward Doc, Filmmakers with Disabilities Doc, which is doing a lot of work to support and network and grow opportunities for filmmakers with disabilities in our documentary space.
That's really helpful and handy. Thank you so much. And I think we're gonna need to start wrapping up now, but I really like asking this question of all filmmakers, and with this film in particular, what would you hope that people who come to this film with no preconceptions, just it is a great film, and you're not being a humble, Jim, it is just a great film. What would you like people to take away who come to this film in 2020 or beyond?
I think that if you feel like your perception of reality has changed just a little bit by, coming to this community and realizing that there is disability pride, that you take that into other parts of your life. Especially nowadays, we are really asked to look at communities that are not like ours. And if you come into thinking about those communities with the same preconceived notions, that you're going to be resistant to really hearing the message and really understanding who people are.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jim has always said to me that, disability is a club that you can join at any time. And it's also just, it's a part of the full spectrum of the human experience, and all of us will cross over it at some point in our life, everybody, and so for me, that's kind of what I hope people take away from it, is that it's just it's a part of the expression of humanity. And when we celebrate it and understand it and open ourselves up to it, we will all experience liberation, I think, as human beings. So I hope the film is a step on the road towards that.
That's a beautiful note to wrap this conversation up on. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much, Nicole, for making this film and for having this conversation with us today. And for everyone who's watching this at the Feature Film Summit, please enjoy the rest of your day and go watch CRIP Camp on Netflix, and tell everyone you know to go watch it on Netflix as well. Thank you so much.